But you might not remember what chapter in Genesis we left off on. 33. Good job. If you got 33, you got the right answer. The last time that we were here was about the first week of December. We had cancellations, we had Christmas stuff, we had New Year's, we had one sermon that I preached in January that was not out of the series, and then we had a double header. And so it has been a while since we've been here. In the beginning, the first part of Genesis chapter 33, we find the reunion of Jacob and Esau. Do you remember that? So Jacob and Esau have been estranged for 20 plus years. God goes and tells Jacob to leave Laban back in chapter 31. In verse 3, and the Lord said unto Jacob, return unto the land of thy fathers and to thy kindred, that I will be with thee. Remember that? Good, because we're going to refer back to it in a little bit. So in chapter 32, Jacob's all scared. He comes up with a plan. When it comes down to it in chapter 33, it's really just, we don't know what's going to happen. I'm going to give him as many gifts as I can, and then I'm going to send my less favorite kids out first, and then my second better favored kids out second. Then I'll send my favorite wife and favorite son out last, and then I'll be at the back, and hopefully he doesn't kill all of them before he gets to me to kill me. That was really the way it was. And when the two met, it didn't turn out to be anything like Jacob had expected. He thought Esau was going to try to kill him. That was the last thing he knew of Esau from 20 years plus was, I'm going to kill Jacob. That's why he ran away to Laban. Remember? So that's all the good stuff that happened in chapter 33. Now, you would think that with this moment of faith, this moment in which Jacob clearly sees the hand of God at work. God said go back. He had to fight through Laban to get back. Then once he got back, he's like, oh, but I got Esau to deal with. And God took care of that. You would think that this would be, and it was at that moment, a high mark, a peak, a pinnacle, a mountaintop. That's over, that kind of a thing. I don't know if you've ever heard anybody say this, and I'm going to throw these away if I'm not careful, so I'm just going to set them down there. I don't know if you ever heard anybody say this, but one of the biggest moments in your life where you will be tempted is not when you're already struggling, although that is a great place for the devil to work, because if he can kick you while you're down, he will. But a far more dangerous and subtle moment in your life is when you have had a victory. Because leading up to whatever that crisis was, you're probably on your knees, you're praying, you're asking God for help, you need God's strength, you don't know what to do, and then that moment comes, there's a resolution to the problem, and it's like, whew, now I can ease off a little bit. There's an expression that people have used, and I think it fits this chapter very well. It fits Jacob's behavior in this chapter very well. Have you ever heard the expression that someone snatched defeat from the jaws of victory? Have you ever heard that? The old expression that everybody's heard is to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. Like, defeat's coming, I'm going to get you, and then just at the last minute you pull out the victory. Yay! But there are times when people have the victory and then just give it away. And here we find that Jacob has the victory and he has defeat snatch that victory away. Now, it wasn't because defeat was inevitable. It wasn't because defeat was a foregone conclusion. It wasn't because defeat was the name of the game. It wasn't because defeat was God's will. It was because Jacob had another serious lapse in faith. God says to Jacob, I've chosen your grandfather and your father, and that blessing and calling has been transferred to you. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to make of you a great nation. All of that Abrahamic covenant has been passed down to Jacob, and Jacob still, through his life, has gotten by on what? What's Jacob known for? He's Jacob the heel grabber, Jacob the supplanter, Jacob the trickster, Jacob the guy who's always conniving, right? Jacob who's a schemer, who comes up with plans. And finally we get to the place where Jacob's plans aren't going to cut it. Or at least you would think that he would have come to that conclusion. But let's pick up in Genesis 33, in verse 9. And Esau said, I have had enough, brother, keep that thou hast. And Jacob said, Nay, I pray thee, now if I have found grace in thy sight, then receive the present from my hand. For therefore have I seen thy face, as though I had seen the face of God, and thou wast pleased with me. Take, I pray thee, the blessing that is brought to thee, because God hath dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough. And he urged him, and he took it. And verse 12, and he said, Let us take our journey, and let us go. I will go before thee. Who's speaking in verse 12? In the couple of preceding verses is like Jacob says, no, Esau, really all the gifts I sent ahead, I want you to keep them. Esau's like, I've got plenty, I don't need it. Jacob says, no, it was a great blessing to me. I'm the one that got blessed. Please let me give you these gifts. He even says it was God that blessed him. And then Esau says, okay, I'll take the gifts. Hey, let's go. Where did God tell Jacob back in chapter 31, where did God tell Jacob to go? We already read it, but I'll take you back there, chapter 31, verse 3. And the Lord said unto Jacob, Return into the land of thy fathers and to thy kindred. So, he's in the land of his fathers, but he hasn't gotten to where his kindred are yet, has he? No. Esau says, come on, let's go home. Let's go back to our kindred. And look at Jacob's response. In verse 13 he said unto him, that is Jacob said unto Esau, My Lord knoweth that the children are tender, and the flocks and herds with young are with me. And if men should overdrive them, one day all the flock will die. You can kind of get the sense of when Jacob kicks it into that conniving mode, can't you? He gets all dramatic here, right? Hey, let's go on back home. Oh, no. I can't go with you. I can't follow you. I won't be able to keep up. The children are tender. The flocks and herds are with young. And if you overdrive them one day, I'll lose it all. Very dramatic. Agreed? Let my Lord, I pray thee, pass over before his servant, and I will lead on softly, according as the cattle that goeth before me, and the children be able to endure, until I come unto my Lord, unto Seir. So that's where they're headed. They're supposed to be going to Seir. And he says, no, you guys, you're going to be so much faster. I'm just going to hold you back. Let me go at my own pace. I'll catch up to you. I'm coming to Seir. And Esau said, Let me now leave with thee some of the folk that are with me. Hey, you want me to leave some of my fellows with you? They can show you the best paths. They can show you where the nicest hotels are or the best pastures along the way. We can get you from here to there. I've got experts right here. And what does Jacob say? In verse 15, Esau said, Let me now leave with thee some of the folk that are with me. And Jacob said, What needeth it? Let me find grace in the sight of my Lord. That is not the Lord. He's saying, Esau, you're my superior. You're my Lord. Let me just have my way on this. I'm still honoring you. You're still the big one, and I'm just, your humble servant. Verse 16, so Esau returned that day on his way to Seir. And Jacob journeyed to where? Succoth. Now, before I even read the rest of the verse, and I don't have a map, I'm not, a technological wizard, I can't flash things up on a screen. But Seir, if we're looking at it on the map, is down here. Succoth is up here. Jacob waited until his brother and his brother's men got out of sight. The same brother, he just said, oh, I'll be right behind you. You go ahead. And instead, as soon as he was out of sight, he said, let's go this way. That fast. I'm not going down to Seir. I don't want to have anything to do with Esau. The problem is what? Where did God tell him to go? Told him to go back to where his kindred were. Didn't say go to Succoth. He said go back to not only the land, but to where your kindred are. So what's the problem? Well, it gets deeper. Verse 17, and Jacob journeyed to Succoth and built him a house. Woo, wait a minute. Jacob is clearly not saying, I'm just going to go over here to Succoth because it's closer, big city, we can hang out for a while, and then once we get our bearings around us and we get our bellies filled and we've had a good vacation, then we'll go down. No. He built a house. See that? Now let me ask you, is there anything wrong with building a house necessarily in and of itself? No. I live in a house. Anybody else here that doesn't live in a house? Of course not. We live in houses. But there was a problem with Jacob building a house. You know what the problem was? Let's see if I can illustrate it. Remember Abraham? Everything you know about Abraham, everything you've heard about Abraham, any time that the dwelling of Abraham is mentioned, where did Abraham live? In a tent. Lot said, I'm going to pitch my tent towards Sodom. Abraham said, I'll pitch my tent the other direction. The angel of the Lord came to say, hey, I'm still going to give you a son. Where was Sarah? In the tent. Right? So that's Abraham. What about Isaac? Where did Isaac live? He lived in tents. When Eliezer brought Rebekah back, Isaac was out of the tent and he was out in the field. And they had a little, marriage ceremony in a field. And Isaac took Sarah to his, or not Sarah, that would be his mother. Oh, Rebekah. Isaac took Rebekah to his tent. Why? Why were they living in tents? They were nomadic. God had not built them or told them, you need to start building cities. In fact, do you remember when Abraham's wife Sarah died, what he had to do? He had to bury his wife, but what did he have to do before he could bury his wife? He had to buy a piece of property. He didn't own any land. Not a stitch. Why? Because it was God's intention for these people to recognize that He was their protection, He was their shelter, He was going to give them the land, but it was certainly not their land yet. Right? So there's another problem we have. Okay? Continue in verse 17. He built a house and he made booths for his cattle. So not only has he set up a permanent dwelling place, a residence, now he's putting up barns. This is where my cattle live. This is the house I live in. Where? Not where God told him to be, in Succoth. Now, verse 18, and Jacob came to Shalem, a city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, when he came from Padan Aram and pitched his tent before that city, and he bought a parcel of a field where he had spread his tent, and the hand of the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of silver, and he erected there an altar and called it El Elohe Israel. So we kind of get one fact, and then we get some preceding information, and then we get another fact. So let me see if I can put it like this. He comes into this area, which is known as Shechem. Wasn't quite yet known as Shechem. which we will soon find out. But he comes to this area, and he goes to Hamor, who is the king of the land there. He buys the property for 100 pieces of money, and that's where he builds his house. That's where he builds his barns, if you will, the booths for his cattle. And that is where he puts up an altar, which he calls El Elohe Israel. Now, El Elohe Israel is a great name. Anybody want to venture a guess as to what it means? So we have El. What does El always mean in the Old Testament in Hebrew? It means God. Okay? Elohe is a possessive form of the word Elohim, another name for God. And then he says Israel. That is a name that he eventually, God himself calls him by, right? So what he's saying is, God is my God, mine, Israel. Here's the altar that I've set up for my God, the God, Israel's God. Great name. But there's also a conflict there. Do you remember when Laban overtook Jacob? How many of you remember that? So they left Padan Aram, they left Laban's house, they take off without telling anybody they're leaving. Laban finds out about it. He comes pursuing after them, but he found out before he left in his hot pursuit that something from his house was missing. Anybody remember what was missing? What was missing? Laban's idols were missing. What's an idol? Well, in this case, some image, some statue, something other than God, the one and only true God. Does anybody remember where the idols were? Yeah, so Laban's daughter Rachel, Jacob's favorite, had taken them and hidden them in the saddlebags. And then made up a story and refused to get off the camel so that they couldn't search the saddlebags. So that means that where are the idols now?
Still there.
They're still with Rachel. So now we have a husband who says, oh, God, he's my God, Israel's God. With a family that says, yeah, but there's other gods. We kind of like them. These are the ones we grew up with. These are our favorites. The same guy who says, oh, God, my God, he's God, God of Israel, is the same guy who, when God said, go here, said, yeah, you know, that's a good idea, but I think I'm going to go over here. The same guy who said, God is my God, Israel's God, is the same guy who, when God said, this is not your place to own yet, you're going to go and sojourn there, said, you know, tents are fine for some people, but I'm really more of a house guy. And you know, I've got some pretty nice cattle. Be a shame if they were just out wandering around somewhere and some of them got lost. I better build some barns to keep my stuff. Anybody remember where he got his stuff? God told him exactly how to get the stuff, and God made sure that the deal he struck with Laban worked out so that all of Laban's stuff went to Jacob. Who provided him the stuff? God did. And yet here's Jacob doing what? The same thing he's always done. You would think that after God had just proven himself so powerful and so real by protecting him from his brother Esau and changing his brother's heart altogether, that Jacob would finally get to the place that he stopped scheming and figured God had it under control. Wouldn't you think so? But that's not at all what happened. In fact, and this is an important point, I want to drive this home, worse things had to happen before Jacob really got himself squared away. Do you remember the story? It's not a story as in made up story. It's a real story, a real account of what happened with Pharaoh. Later on, the children of Israel down in Egypt, God wants them to leave. Moses comes in and says, let my people go. And Pharaoh says, all right, you can go. But then he changed his mind. And then, some plague would happen. And Pharaoh would get upset and tired of the plague. And he'd come back to Moses and say, listen, I'm sorry, I was wrong. You guys go ahead and go. And then he would change his mind. And then another plague would happen over and over and over again. And every plague got worse than the last. You remember that? Sometimes we can learn lessons the easy way or through our stubbornness and self-will, we can learn lessons the hard way. Kit will learn some lessons the easy way, and she will learn some lessons the hard way. You have learned some lessons the easy way, and you've learned some lessons the hard way. Anybody ever been around, let's say, for example, an electric fence? Yeah, me too. Anybody, the first time they ever were around an electric fence and somebody said, that's an electric fence, don't touch it, and you were like, is it really? Huh, it wasn't. And then it sends that pulse through. You ever have that happen? Some electric fences are not constantly electric. They are electric in bursts like every 5 to 10 seconds. And so the idea is if a cow's really, or horse or whatever is trying to get through the fence, they're going to be around that wire long enough that they'll get hit with the pulse. And the pulse can pulse much stronger than a continuous current. So basically the fence electrifier, whatever that thing's called, it builds up this charge, builds it up, builds it up, builds it up, and then it releases it. Zap! Okay, and then it builds it up, builds it up, builds it up, and zap. I could have learned the easy way. Somebody says, don't touch that, it's electric. But what did I choose to do? Of course, right? Because I've never seen an electric fence. Surely, go back to the Garden of Eden. God says to Adam, Adam explains to Eve, don't eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for in the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. What does the devil come along and tempt Eve with? Are you sure? I mean, really? You're going to die? What's die anyway? You ever see anything die? Nothing's ever died, has it? Eve says, it does look nice. It smells good. And who doesn't want to be smart? And what does she do? Learn the hard way. Learn the hard way, right? When you decide to learn the hard way, every new lesson you're taught the hard way gets worse than the last. You know why? It's your nature to push it a little further. Hey, I got away with that. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to try a little more. Hey, I got away with that. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to try a little more. That's our nature, right? Same is true in our spiritual relationship with the Lord. If we think we've gotten away with something, then we might be tempted to say, yay, if God said. I want you to take a moment, and I want you to also, in doing this, I want you to be thinking and preparing yourself for what we're going to be talking about in the next couple of Wednesday nights, because it's a really, really big deal. The next chapter, chapter 34, has been described as one of the top 3 darkest moments in Israel's history. Very smart, well-respected Bible scholars have said, chapter 34 is so overwhelming, I don't suggest you get up and preach about it. Let's start off chapter 34 and come back and finish 33. Chapter 34 says, and Dinah, the daughter of Leah, which she bare unto Jacob. This is Jacob's only daughter. Went out to see the daughters of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, prince of the country, saw her, he took her and lay with her and defiled her. So what's the very next thing that happens in this wonderful city where we just built our new house, where we're not supposed to be? Oh, Jacob's only daughter gets raped. That's a hard lesson to learn from, isn't it? That's a hard one. We will talk about it, and you can read it. I want you to read it. I want you to read all of chapter 34 this coming week. We're going to break this down into several different things, but it is a very fierce and fearsome chapter that needs some explanation. And the things we're going to take away from it, Lord willing, will help us not to learn things the hardest way we possibly can. But if we come back to chapter 33, let's just talk about a couple of quick points, and I'll get you on to the snacks, because Lord knows Kit needs them now. What do you do? See? That's right. She'll tell you. Give me the food. All right. That's it. So, what's the first thing we see? The first thing we saw that Jacob made as a mistake was he went right back to scheming. Why would he go right back to scheming? Here's my 2 cents worth. I think he went right back to scheming because he failed to give God the glory or even recognize God's hand in what had just happened with Esau. If you're a schemer and your plan goes great, does it cross your mind that maybe God did that? Or do you think, man, that was a great plan? The truth is, we usually don't thank the Lord when our plan that we laid out goes really well. And then, ironically, we get upset sometimes when things don't work out real well for us and wonder, what in the world is God doing? Let me ask you a question. Have you always gotten in trouble for everything you did wrong? Anybody? No. Come on now. You've always. What about the stuff nobody found out about? That's what I'm talking about. Exactly. Have you been caught every time you did something wrong? I have not. I will say that at some point today, in the 120 miles I drove, I probably, for example, exceeded the speed limit. And I did not get pulled over. Okay? Now, of course, you know what'll happen is, the next time I do get pulled over, I'll probably go, oh, why did I get pulled over? And forget all about the 100 times I could have been pulled over and wasn't, right? Because that's how we are. Yes, sir?
My dad always went by, it's not illegal if you don't get caught.
There's a little bit of interestingness to that.
My mom says it's just a suggestion.
Well, the word limit is on the sign, but I understand that it is somewhat defined by the way that it is enforced, right? And so I understand, but here's my point, okay? I think, hey, I did something wrong, I didn't get caught. Next time we're tempted, you know what's going to happen? No, you might. Well, if you have studied probabilities, there is no higher chance the second time than there was the first. It's random. If you're going to get caught, let's say, if you're going to get caught 1 out of 50 times, it could be that you're caught the second time and then could go 49 more times and not get caught. It's like rolling dice. It's probabilities. But we have this false idea that we can do wrong and get away with it. Sometimes I think that's because we forget that while God is long-suffering, He still sees all and knows all. But the truth is, God never just overlooks sin. He never just says, yeah, it's a little sin, I'm not too worried about it. Realize every sin we commit, whether it is a sin of omission or a sin of commission, I'll explain that in a minute, every sin we commit is a sin that Jesus Christ had to pay for on the cross. I think that's a big deal. Don't you? What's the difference between a sin of omission and commission? Just as a little parenthetical, we'll get back to you in a minute, buddy. I don't want you to strain your arm too much. I'll get back to you, I promise. What's the difference between a sin of omission and a sin of commission? Simple. A sin of omission is something you should have done and didn't. You omitted it. You ever known that you were supposed to do something, you didn't do it? In fact, I will say that I think growing up I got in trouble more for my sins of omission with my parents than I did my sins of commission. Mom would, leave me at home and say, you better clean your room, better be done before I get home. And I would just omit that. Until she got home, and then I was like, oh, God, I'll do it now. My dad once ran over a bucket of paint someone had spilled in the road and got beige paint down the side of his silver car, our silver car, the family silver car. It happened to be just as school let out. Dad got some paint thinner from a friend who worked at a body shop, and the guy said, if you will scrub that paint carefully, you should be able to get that tan paint off that silver car without damaging the silver paint. So guess whose job it was? Because my dad was going to work. I would go out there maybe every day, maybe every other day, and I would start wiping on the paint, trying to get it off. And it was summertime, and it was hot, and the humidity was high, and I would need to take a break within about 10 minutes. A couple of months went by, and Dad came home and hadn't asked or looked in a while, and he said, son, how's the paint coming on that car? Did you get it off yet? And I was like, and he went outside, and he saw the paint. This is a little bit of poetic justice, just a little. He saw the paint, he got really angry, he got a Scotch-Brite pad, and he scrubbed on that fender until there was no paint. Not the factory paint, not the beige paint, but he was angry, and I was in trouble. Was I in trouble because of something I did? Nope. I was in trouble because of something I didn't do. Is Jacob in trouble here for something he did? Nope. He's in trouble for something he didn't do as much as he's in trouble for something he did. Yes, he did build a house. Yes, he did go to Shechem. But what he didn't do, no matter what other thing it had been, he didn't do God's will. He didn't do what was right. The Bible tells us, to him that knoweth to do good, and doeth it not, to him it is sin. Now think about that for a minute. If you know something is the right thing to do, and you just don't, that's as much of a sin as if you had gone out and done something intentionally wrong. And Jacob would soon learn the bitterness of failing to obey God. So he went the wrong direction. He built the wrong things. And then, and this is the scariest of all, I want you to listen and we'll be done, I promise. But he built an altar while he still wasn't right with God. And I'm going to say this as succinctly as I know how. You can come to church, you can sing in the youth choir, you can sing in the adult choir, you can help set up the service, you can help lead the singing or pray or give prayer requests or testimonies or do any number of things in our services, this one, the others, Sunday school. You can do all sorts of good things. Okay? But if your heart is not right with the Lord, those things are not pleasing the Lord. Again, Jacob set up an altar. Oh, God, the God is Israel's God. My God, He's mine. That's my God right there. I'm going to build an altar to my God. And yet the very next verses talk about the first of a couple tragedies that happened in chapter 34. Why did they happen? Because Jacob was not where he was supposed to be. He was not doing what he was supposed to do. And no matter how religious he acted, it did not make up for the fact that he was disobeying God. As you read chapter 34, there are some very strange things that happen. Some very strange things that happen. Some very sad things that happen. But everything that happens in chapter 34 to Jacob's daughter, to Jacob's two sons, to a city full of men and their families, all started because Jacob was serving God in name, but not in heart. Be careful that you give God your heart and not just your actions. Does that make sense? Man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the... And you can have the outward appearance as polished as you want it to be. You can fool everybody around you. I was a very well-mannered preacher's kid who had sung in the choir, who had even taught Sunday school. They let me teach Sunday school at 13. Not every Sunday. They let me fill in. It's pretty cool. I had won Christian school competitions in Bible knowledge. I went and knocked on doors and invited kids to come to Sunday school on the bus. Before I actually got saved at 14. If you were looking on the outward appearance, you'd have probably said, kid's doing good. But I knew in my heart that all that I was about was what was out there and what God cares about most. Now, the out there, the stuff that people see, when you have your heart right, all of that will come out because it comes from the inside out. But you can put all the outside in place and say, God, the God, He's my God, He's Israel's God. But if your heart is not doing the right things, then all the outward appearance stuff is in vain. Let's pray. Lord, I think all of us can relate to Jacob. It's easy to point fingers and say, look at here what he did, and look at his lack of faith, and look at how many times he messed up. But Lord, these principles that we see in action in this chapter, the ones that lead to the terrible tragedies of chapter 34, those things in Jacob's life, wow, we can find them in our own lives so many times. Lord, I pray this evening that you would speak to us. Help us to recognize that we can put on all the great appearances in the world, but our relationship with you and our heart and our fellowship with you are what really matter the most. Help us, Lord, I pray, not to be tempted, that we've got it under control, that our plans are working. Because truly, Lord, if they are not your plans, we can success ourselves right into failure. And Lord, I pray you'd bless each and every one that's here this evening. We thank you for them. In Jesus' name, amen.